Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're back at it again. My name is The Advocate, and today I'm an advocate for The Wise Man's Fear, a book review. So I'm on summer break from the university, and I currently find myself here in Edinburgh, and I thought, hey, why not do a book review? This one being on the sequel to The Name of the Wind called The Wise Man's Fear. So if you don't already know, The Wise Man's Fear is the second book in the Kingkiller Chronicle series written by Patrick Rothfuss. It was released on March 1, 2011, and my oh my, I have quite a few thoughts on this book. Now before we get started on the video proper, I just want to give you guys a heads up that the first part of this video, I will touch on material from the first book in the Kingkiller Chronicle series, The Name of the Wind. If you have not read that book, then I strongly recommend you click off this video and go read that book, as I will be spoiling material from that particular book. However, if you have read that book but have not read The Wise Man's Fear, then fear not, as the first part of this video will contain my spoiler-free thoughts on this book. However, once we reach the second part of this video, then all bets are off and I will be going full bore on The Wise Man's Fear spoilers. Timestamps have been provided in the description below, so feel free to click those to skip to the section of your choosing. Additionally, this book review, just like all my other book reviews, is a reflection of my own subjective opinion. If you disagree with anything that I say in this video, which I'm thinking is likely going to be the case, then I encourage you to leave a comment and let me know why you disagree with me and what your thoughts are on this book. We all have our own thoughts and opinions, and that's awesome. I just ask that you please respect my opinion on this, as my review will be somewhat critical. Let's all share in healthy discussion rather than angry debate is all I'm saying. So with all that said, let's get to it. Now, despite some issues that I had with Name of the Wind, I would say that all in all, I really liked that book. I found it to be an altogether enjoyable time. Patrick Rothfuss is a great writer, and I respect the heck out of him for creating this diverse, interesting world, which he definitely describes with his poetic prose. This book, however, I liked some of it. Heck, I would say that I even loved some of the writing and found it to be superior than the first book in parts. However, I didn't like all of it, and I do have some legitimate issues with this book, more than I did with Name of the Wind. Now, the first thing you'll notice about this book is that it's a huge book. It's nearly 1,000 pages in length, which is quite a bit larger than The Name of the Wind, and it definitely feels its length. I found that significant chunks of this book, particularly in the second half, could have easily been removed and very little substance would be lost from the overall story. Now, before we jump into why that is, allow me to give a spoiler-free plot synopsis of the story to give you guys some context on my thoughts. This book immediately picks up where The Name of the Wind left off, as our main character, an adult red-haired innkeeper named Kavoth, continues to chronicle his life story to his scribe, who's unironically named the Chronicler, about his time as a teenager and how he eventually became to be infamously known as Kavoth Kingkiller. We then, as the reader, jump into Kavoth's memoir as our adult protagonist narrates his adolescence through a hindsight first-person point of view. Now, unlike The Name of the Wind, which I personally thought took a long time to set up and get going, The Wise Man's Fear immediately jumps us into the action, as by chapter 3, Kavoth is already pretty much narrating his time at university. And that's honestly pretty great, as I personally found Kavoth's time at university to be the strongest part of the first book. The university hijinks, the camaraderie, the drinking with friends, the fighting with the school bully, all that good stuff is here, and I would say even better than the first book. We as the reader are already familiar with the university setting and Kavoth's school friends, so this book takes the opportunity to even further expand on our familiarity with that university life by showing us new sides to many of the staff and student body. This is especially apparent in Kavoth's ragtag group of friends, as they are all given more depth and personality. The characters of Willem and Sim are further explored, and it's just nice to see that they each have a surprising amount of depth to them, which is nice, given that I don't think that was readily apparent to us in the first book. Simon in particular got quite a few laughs from me periodically during the university chapters. Technically, Simon interjected, grinning, he played the joke on the lute. Everyone turned to look at him, and his grin faded a bit. You see, he actually played a joke on a lute. He looked down at the table, his grin fading as his face flushed a sudden embarrassed red. Sorry. More importantly, though, these guys just seem like genuine friends. Their drinking adventures, their pillow talk conversations, their willingness to stick up for each other, their friendship feels unpretentious and reflects how real university friends would act in our world. Some of our lady friends from the previous book also make an appearance in this book, and their interactions with our main trio of dudes just bring a smile to my face. Their exchanges feel candid, and without delving into spoilers, the Scooby-Doo schemes that they all partake in were such a joy to read that I wish more chapters could have been dedicated to the university life. The humor isn't solely concentrated on our group of young teenagers, though, as even the teaching staff receives quite a bit of character. Eldon in particular, who played a minor role in the first book, is expanded upon in this book as he plays a substantial role during Kavot's time at university. Every time he makes an appearance, I giggle because I know we're in for something good, and I always look forward to it. You can divide infinity an infinite number of times, and the resulting pieces will still be infinitely large, Uresh said in his odd Lenati accent. But if you divide a non-infinite number an infinite number of times, the resulting pieces are non-infinitely small. Since they are non-infinitely small, but there are an infinite number of them, if you add them back together, their sum is infinite. This implies any number is in fact infinite. Wow, Elodin said after a long pause. He leveled a serious finger at the Lenati man. Uresh, your next assignment is to have sex. If you do not know how to do this, see me after class. Now at this point, I know many of you might be asking yourself, well, wait a minute, Advocate, you said you had a lot of issues with this book. But all I've heard from you so far has been compliments and praise. If the university stuff is better in this book than in the previous one, then why do you like this book less? Well, my friend, I'm glad you asked that. Although I do enjoy Kavot's time at university, those chapters unfortunately only constitute the first third of the book. Yes, that's right, we're doing it again, ladies and gentlemen. Just like the previous book, at some point Kavoth does step away from the university, and unfortunately the book does get rocky after that. Now there's nothing wrong with stepping away from the well-trodden ground of the university for a change of pace and a change in location. However, Kavoth changes location multiple times throughout the story, and each time he does so, it becomes progressively more and more difficult to become invested in each new scenario. This book very quickly becomes a collection of mini-stories as Kavoth journeys from place to place, meets up with a new cast of characters, and tries to solve the problem of the week. Now, when zoomed out, I like what Rothfuss was going for here during Kavoth's travels, as each new location tests Kavoth in new and interesting ways to help him grow into a more better, well-rounded individual. However, when zooming in and looking at the individual components of each of these story arcs, I can't help but ask myself, was all of this necessary? I found significant portions of each story arc to be a frustrating struggle to get through, particularly at the beginning. It's not until near the end of each mini-story where I finally found myself invested in each respective arc. The mini-stories were finally beginning to bear fruit, and I was like, yes, here we go, finally, I'm invested. I can't wait to see us further delve into this arc. But then, boom, some plot convenience shows up and immediately rushes Kavoth off to the next arc. And it's frustrating to say the least. Now, I understand Rothfuss really wanted us to live through the day-to-day slice-of-life feel of Kavoth's time at each of these individual unique locations. However, I feel we could have had our investment pay off equally with less chapters dedicated to meandering around these random locations and focusing more time on getting Kavoth further along in the story whilst arriving to our fruit-bearing sections of these mini-stories. The structure of this book leads me to believe that Rothfuss was more interested in writing a collection of novellas that coincidentally happened to have the same main character, as opposed to being bothered to write a full story. Which, if that's the case, then that's fine. It's his story and more than his right to write whatever he wants. But if that is the case, then personally I think Rothfuss should have just gone all the way and written a bunch of novellas, and advertised the book as The Wise Man's Fear, a collection of novellas starring Kavoth. As is, this book constantly feels like it's in conflict with itself because it doesn't know if it wants to be a cohesive story or a collection of short stories. It feels like Rothfuss is trying to have his cake and eat it too. Now again, this is all just my subjective opinion, and if you truly did enjoy all the adventures that Kavoth went on and this is your jam, then that's awesome. I'm really happy for you. I wish I could share in that happiness, because I honestly do feel that Mr. Rothfuss derailed the book a third of the way through the story, and personally, I think he should have just focused on what was working, which is exploring and delving deeper into Kavoth's time at university. Now, I don't think it's all bad. For all my misgivings about the events that transpired during the non-university chapters, I do have mad respect for Rothfuss's ability to build his world with which the story takes place. Each part of the world has its own unique customs, culture, language, and even prejudices. It's a very realistic form of world building, as similar to our real world. Geographic distances isolate various people groups from other cultures, so naturally over time, these cultures develop inherent prejudices against other people who are not from their place of birth. Now, although I completely understand people's complaints with having to read this very prejudiced dialogue, which comes across as nationalism and culturalism, I think it's a very fair form of world building as it reflects the unfortunate nationalism that exists within our very real world. So despite my complaints about the overall structure of this book, there are bright spots to be found within the story arcs for sure. With that said, the one constant that unfortunately permeates every single mini-story within this book is the return of the Kavoth Denna ship. Yes, the ship that just won't quit makes its unfortunate return, and I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, just the character of Denna just does not work for me. This relationship dynamic feels forced, and I am just not a fan. I never said I was in love, I interjected. I never said that. She confuses me, and I'm fond of her, but it doesn't go further than that. How could it? I don't know her well enough to make any earnest claim of love. How can I love something I don't understand? Rothfuss is consistently trying to hammer home this will they, won't they romantic tension between these two characters, and personally it just doesn't work for me. It feels very half-baked, and I'll delve more into why that is in the spoiler section. Now going back to Kavoth, one thing I know that a lot of people seem to have a consistent issue with is just how good he is at everything. But I personally never really took issue with this in the first book, as it was always very clear that although Kavoth does have some natural affinities that put him ahead of many of his compatriots, there's always one person who's better than him. He is consistently humbled, and I never really felt that he was too OP for this story. The same can be said about this book, as although Kavoth may come out on top in one instance, he immediately falls back to reality in the next instance. Sure, Kavoth has got some swagger in his confidence that occasionally borders on arrogance, but usually the moment that happens, a stronger character will appear in the story to put Kavoth back at his place. However, one thing I did take issue with regards to the character of Kavoth was his general view of women, which almost borders on toxic. Each woman is like an instrument, waiting to be learned, loved, and finally played, to have at least her own true music made. Some might take offense at this way of seeing things, not understanding how a trooper views his music. They might think I degrade women. They might consider me callous or boorish or crude. But those people do not understand love or music or me. Now some readers may just chalk up this dialogue as the ramblings of a 16-year-old boy. That although it is unfortunate that Kavoth has this toxic masculine mentality with regards to women, it's not completely out of the blue for a teenage boy to think like this. However, it's not our teenage protagonist who's narrating this story. Rather, it's our older, allegedly more mature protagonist who is narrating the events of this story. It's the older Kavoth who still thinks like this. And although I brought up one example of his noxious mentality, there are other more severe instances in this book where Kavoth should have probably just kept his thoughts to himself. So I think that pretty much covers all the general stuff that I wanted to talk about with regards to the Wise Man's Fear. If you have not read this book, then I strongly suggest that you skip to the end of the video and the timestamp provided below, guys, because we're about to enter into spoilers. However, if you have read The Wise Man's Fear and you want to hear my thoughts with regards to some of the spoiler stuff in this book, then keep watching. Now, in my review of The Name of the Wind, I mentioned how I had a problem with the inclusion of the Chandrian, as besides the beginning of the book when the Chandrian kill Kavoth's parents and exterminate his entire troop, they don't really have significant storyline implications within that book. The same can be said for The Wise Man's Fear. Aside from one scene where the leader of the Chandrian appears in this big battle with Kavoth and Kavoth's ragtag army of bounty hunters, they don't really have any significant impact within the story. The same can be said about the Aemir, as Kavoth's newfound passion in researching this group of mysterious church knights never really pays fruit within the story. In fact, by the end of the book, no progress is really made on Kavoth's search for the Aemir or the Chandrian. Now, I understand we still have one more book to go, so I'm sure we'll get some big-time answers in the Doors of Stone. However, after reading the first two books in the series, the Chandrian and the Aemir feel like unnecessary goalposts. With the exception of the scenes I previously mentioned, they do not affect the story in any way. I honestly wish they weren't even part of the story and function more as accidental plot devices. Beings whom Kavoth unintentionally runs into without really searching them out or knowing who they are. Now, as far as parts of the story go where we do spend most of our time in, the various story arcs that reflect the ever-changing locations that Kavoth visits within this story feel unnecessarily long. There is a precarious balance between having a minimum page count length in order to allow the reader to properly invest themselves in the characters and the location that take place within that scene, and not spending too much time at a location so much that you bore the reader. However, the Wise Man's Fear doesn't really keep this balance very well, and in fact I feel like it spends too much time in these locations to the point that although we do get invested eventually in the characters of that location, Rothfuss could have cut chapters and the reader would have still received the same return on their investment in the character development. The best example of this is in the middle of the book when Kvothe is traveling with this group of mercenaries and he slowly begins to develop a friendship with a item person known as Tempe. Kvothe and Tempe slowly build their relationship over time, and by the end of the book, they feel like genuine friends. When Tempe and Kvothe share a brief reunion during Kvothe's test before he duels with Carceret, the short-lived meeting elicits a heartwarming sense of fondness that feels rightly earned after the two spent so much time with each other. However, this same payoff could have just as easily been achieved without having to read through multiple chapters of meandering through the Eld where nothing much of consequence happens until the end of that particular story arc. We could have cut all the campfire stories, squabbling arguments, and ill luck in finding bandits, whilst still developing Kvothe and Tempe's relationship, and honestly the story would have been all the better for it. Now on the topic of shortening story arcs, the one arc that I feel, rather than being shortened, would have been better if it was just completely removed, is the Felurian arc. I actively dislike Kvothe's time with Felurian. I do not know what Rothfuss was thinking when he decided to invest so many chapters in Kvothe's sexcapade with this 1,000-year-old magic pixie fairy. It feels just out of the blue and completely unnecessary. Honestly, I do not know what the point of this part of the book was, other than to show us that, oh look, Kvothe is great at sex. Why? But when I tried to leave the Fae, she would not let me. She was too fond of my artistry. I shouldn't be coy, I suppose. I implied rather strongly that Felurian thought quite highly of me as a lover. I offer no apology for this behavior except to say that I am a young man of 16, proud of my newfound skills, and not above a little bragging. The only thing of consequence that occurs within this story arc is that we learn about the Cathay, and what they mean for the overall implications of the story. But besides that, and I guess showing us that there is magic beyond just using sympathy, I was confused. And speaking of women, Denna. Denna is not my cup of tea. She pops up periodically throughout the story, and every time she does, I audibly groan. I do not know what Rothfuss sees in this character. I do not know what he sees in the relationship between her and Kvothe. It just does not work for me. If it works for you, that's great. I just do not understand. It honestly seems like a situation where a girl doesn't really see a guy as more than just a friend, but she still wants to keep him within arm's reach for the attention, and the guy wants nothing more than the girl to like him, so he sticks around her in hopes that maybe one day she'll notice him and consider him as a viable romantic option. All this without ever just asking her out, of course. It's Friendzone 101. I thought of all the others who had tried to tie her to the ground and failed. So I resisted, showing her the songs and poems I had written, knowing that too much truth can ruin a thing. And if that meant she wasn't entirely mine, what of it? I would be the one she could always return to without fear of recrimination or question. So I did not try to win her, and contented myself with playing a beautiful game. But there was always a part of me that hoped for more, and so there was a part of me that was always a fool. Now yes, I know Kvothe is 16, and he's got tunnel vision for this girl, who despite sending him mixed signals, is clearly just friend-zoning him. But man, you would think after so many years, Kvothe would just get it through his thick skull that she's not worth the chase. Especially because Kvothe is supposed to be a smart guy. How can he not figure this out? Ugh, the storyline really makes me want to pull my hair out. And I truly do hope that in The Doors of Stone, Denna either develops into single-handedly the greatest female character of all time, or we just drop the whole Kvothe and Denna ship and move on. It's time sinks like those that really hold this book back for me. And although I did like this book's ending and how it felt like a journey come full circle, as we feel this sense of accomplishment and say, oh, look at all the places Kvothe has been to, look at all he's done, it still feels like there was a lot of wasted time and wasted chapters, and it just wasn't my cup of tea. So all in all, I think my feelings on this book, just like this book itself, are all over the place. I liked some of it, I even loved some of it, but man, there are some serious low points for sure. I think Rothfuss did a really good job with the broad strokes of the story he was trying to tell and what he was going for with a lot of these story arcs, but man, it's whenever we delve into those microscopic details that I either become disinterested, confused, or just downright frustrated. But that pretty much covers everything we wanted to talk about with regards to the Wise Man's Fear. Just to reiterate, guys, this review was based on my subjective opinion. If you disagree with me, then that's completely okay, guys. I just hope that you can understand where I'm coming from with regards to this review and why I'm maybe not as keen on this book as others are. Thank you so very much for watching this video, guys. If you made it this far and aren't in the mood to tar or feather me, I would really appreciate if you could leave a like, comment, consider subscribing to tag along with me for future fantasy book reviews. I love reading these fantasy books, and I look forward to providing more videos for you guys within the near future. Thank you once again, and until next time, The Advocate